Hello everyone, it's nice to see you all, especially in this weather. I'm glad you all made it. No one stuck in flooding, hopefully, on their way in. I know I almost did. Before I kick off to the main part of my intro, I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional owners of the land on which this beautiful campus is situated on. The Whadjuk Noongar people remain the spiritual and cultural custodians of the land and continue to practice their values, languages, beliefs and knowledge here. As a fellow member of UWA's Young Alumni, I'd like to welcome you to this event, the final of the Winter Wealth series tailored specifically for our young alumni, hosted by some of our alumni. This event will be focused on how to find your super, a bit about your superannuation 101 guide and looking at what super is, how it works and what it means for your future self. UWA Young Alumni are a part of a vibrant community of like-minded peers, and there is an array of events and ways to stay involved that you are more than welcome to be attending in the future. You can see these on the Young Alumni website, Facebook page, LinkedIn, as well as the University Club here as well. There's quite a great partnership between the two. You can also like us on Facebook, join us on LinkedIn, or stay connected with myself or any of the other members of the Young Alumni team here today. You might notice that there are also some cameras filming the event. I know they're certainly intimidating me. It's so that the wider Young Alumni audience who couldn't make it here today are able to watch it online later. Thank you as well to our amazing event partners tonight, UniSuper and the University of Western Australia Club, which is where we are today. Without these two amazing organisations, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you very much. And a big thank you to all of you for coming here tonight, as I said, especially in this weather. It's nice to have so many amazing faces here today. And I'll pass on now to Rudy. So thank you very much.
Good evening everyone, and welcome to tonight's session, Find Your Super, which is the third and final of our Winter Wealth series seminars. So as Rhiannon has kindly introduced, my name is Rudy Leong and I'm a private client advisor at UniSuper. And before I begin, I'd also like to just take a bit of moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. So here's our agenda for this evening's session. We'll start by discussing what is super. Now, it's often an area which is given very little thought of when you begin your working life, but having a good understanding of what it is and making some small decisions early can have a big impact on your overall retirement down the track. Next, we'll talk about the different types of contributions that you can make to super. Within this topic, we'll explore different areas such as the tax benefits of salary sacrifice, the benefits of compound interest, and also take a look at the government's First Home Super Saver scheme. We'll then discuss investments within super, as well as how one can use super to put in place a good plan B by having the right insurances set up. And lastly, we'll go through who we are at UniSuper, followed by some time at the end to answer any questions. So what is super? Superannuation is about looking after your future self, and it's a chance to create intergenerational wealth and create a support structure for your family. Compulsory super was introduced in Australia in the early 1990s, and the purpose of super is to provide and encourage savings for retirement and also to reduce the burden of the government's age pension scheme. So superannuation is essentially a favourable tax structure to encourage us all to grow our wealth during our working life, so that we have the funds to look after ourselves in retirement, and if we want, we can also continue to support our family too. While your super is put aside for the future, it shouldn't be out of your mind until then. Whilst access is restricted until you reach a certain age, it is still your money after all. So it's never too late to learn about your super, and it's never too late to start contributing, or it's never too early as well. So your employer pays a compulsory sum of money into your super account, and this is called the superannuation guarantee, or SG for short. And so it's currently paid at a rate of 10.5% of your salary. Some employers pay a superannuation contribution higher than the standard SG amount, kind of like an additional employee benefit. So for example, a lot of employers within the tertiary industry very generously pay up to 17%. So how does a super account work? Firstly, it's important to note that there are two types of super accounts. One is known as a defined benefit, and the other is called an accumulation account. A defined benefit style super account is an older type of super account and far less common nowadays. The prevailing style of super is the accumulation account. So we'll be focusing more on the accumulation style account during this evening's presentation. So how does a super account work? In short, your super is made up of contributions from your employer, also any contributions that you make through either salary sacrifice or other personal contribution strategies. And from there, investment earnings are added or losses are deducted, any applicable fees and taxes are paid, and any insurance premiums that are funded via your super are also deducted out of your balance. Members within an accumulation account generally have flexibility in terms of their investment choices. At the same time, accumulation members bear all the risk associated with those investments. So if you've not made any investment choice within your super before, most super funds will have a default option whereby members will automatically be invested in if you don't actively select for yourself. Now, it can be a good idea to review how you're invested within your super, as there really isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. And if you are within the default option within your fund, it might not always be appropriate for your situation. Now, your account balance will typically fluctuate based on your investment choice, as different options will provide different returns based on the exposure to riskier assets or growth assets. Over the long term, those investments with a higher allocation to growth investments will generally outperform the less risky options. However, in the short to medium term, the options with higher exposure to growth assets will also experience a greater level of volatility and therefore have a higher chance of achieving a negative return. You may already be aware of the impact that changes to our economic and geopolitical environment, such as the COVID pandemic or more recently the war in Ukraine, has had on the world's share markets, which in turn impacts your super balance. So in terms of accessing super, as I mentioned previously, super is generally locked away, or what we call preserved, whilst one is working and in the process of accumulating their retirement savings. So super benefits are classified into three main categories that we've listed up on this slide here. So you've got preserved benefits, restricted non-preserved, and unrestricted non-preserved. Now, in order to access preserved benefits, you must satisfy a condition of release. So generally speaking, a condition of release includes permanent retirement, ceasing an employment arrangement after age 60, or reaching age 65. However, there are also other conditions of release if you don't satisfy those, such as total and permanent disablement or financial hardship. So the second type of preservation, the restricted non-preserved benefits. So these can be accessed when you leave your contributing employer or otherwise if you meet a condition of release. And lastly, unrestricted non-preserved funds. They can be accessed at any time. So preserved and restricted non-preserved funds become unrestricted non-preserved upon meeting a condition of release. Now, the preservation status of your funds can be found generally within your annual member statement or via your online account of your super account. And generally speaking, it's highly likely that for most of us here in the room tonight, your funds are probably going to be preserved. Lastly, when it comes to temporary residents, they're also able to access their super after permanently leaving the country, subject to meeting certain conditions. So besides from the compulsory employer SG contribution, many individuals are often unaware about their options when it comes to making additional voluntary contributions to super. So super is one of the most, if not the most tax-effective investment vehicles that can be used to save for your retirement, and it can be a good idea to get a head start and put plans in place early for your eventual retirement, no matter how long away that may seem. So there are certain limits, also known as caps, which apply to how much money that you can put into super. So the first type of contribution that can be made to super before paying income tax is known as a concessional contribution. And for most individuals, a tax rate of 15% is applied to these contributions. Now, compared to our marginal tax rate, so when you're working, which can be as high as 47%, this, as the name suggests, can often be quite a generous or concessional rate of tax than one might otherwise pay on income earned in their personal name. Now, the cap on these contributions, as it says up there, is $27,500 a year currently. Another way of contributing to super is by making after-tax, or what we call non-concessional contributions. Now, no tax applies to these contributions, as generally tax will have already been deducted. So, for example, if you had a lump sum amount of cash savings at the bank and you wanted to put this away into super to, I guess, work harder for you and be invested for your longer term retirement, you could use your non-concessional contribution caps. Now, the limit on these contributions is currently $110,000 per annum. And if you, let's say if you had more than $110,000 per annum to contribute, you can also use what we call the bring forward provisions, and you're able to contribute as much as $330,000 by what we call bringing forward another 2 years worth of cap space. So therefore you can do 3 years of cap in one go. Now note, for an individual to do so, the main criteria is that they must be under 75, and certain other restrictions also apply to those with higher super balances. Now, over time, the government has, I guess, made small changes or adjusted these contribution rules to try and make it a fairer system. So, for example, if one were to inadvertently breach the concessional contribution cap, tax is still levied, but it's applied at a rate which is equal to the same amount that the individual would have otherwise paid if they'd earned that income in their personal name. On top of this, one also has the option to, if you do inadvertently breach the cap, have the tax that you owe deducted from your super as well. So it's not really a big deal, I guess, in this day and age, if you were to exceed any of these caps. Now, for those on higher incomes, which we define in this context as having an adjusted taxable income greater than $250,000, an additional tax of 15% may be charged on their super contributions. And this is known as Division 293 tax. And so it means that their contributions above the $250,000 threshold are taxed at 30%. However, compared to the top marginal tax rate, which is your 47%, including your Medicare, this is still a concessional rate of tax to what they might otherwise pay. So let's take a look at a case study to illustrate salary sacrifice in action. So up here we've got Sarah. She's currently 51 and is starting to think about preparing for her retirement. Now, Sarah earns $100,000 a year, and she decides that she'd like to salary sacrifice 10% of her salary, so $10,000 a year, into her super. So in this case, Sarah would therefore pay 15% tax on her contributions, on the salary sacrifice contributions, which means that after tax, a net amount of $8,500 per annum is paid into her super fund. So now, because she's chosen to salary sacrifice into super, this also therefore has the effect of reducing her taxable income for the financial year. So her taxable income is reduced from $100,000 down to $90,000, and the money that she's chosen to put into super that would have otherwise been taxed at her marginal tax rate of 34.5%, including Medicare levy, if she'd earned it in her personal name. So that saving is equivalent of $3,450. So the difference between the $3,450 that she saved in her personal name and the 15% tax that she's paid going into super is a saving of around of $1,950 a year. So as you can see, it's quite a tax-effective way of, I guess, building up your retirement savings and reducing your personal income tax. So in addition, as I said, Sarah's boosted her super by $8,500 net. So when looking at the longer term, if we were to assume an average return of, let's say, 7% per annum based on how Sarah's got her super currently invested, and let's say we take a 15-year time frame, this makes a difference of around just over $136,000 a year to her overall retirement savings. Now, for simplicity's sake, in this case study, we've excluded the effects of compound interest, which we'll discuss on the next slide. Now, one important point to consider when it comes to making salary sacrifice, though, is that once your funds are salary sacrificed into super, you're unable to access them because they become preserved until you meet a condition of release. So if you do decide to make contributions to super, just make sure that it's money that you're able to forego in the short to medium term, and you're comfortable that you won't require the funds until you're able to satisfy that condition of release, which will likely occur many years away when you're about to retire. Now on to another case study. So what we've tried to briefly illustrate here is the effects of compound interest over time. So firstly, for those in the room who did attend our previous Happy, Healthy and Wealthy seminar, we went through a very similar case study, so I apologise if this covers any old ground. However, it's good to provide a bit of a refresher again. So in this case study, meet Sue and Reggie. Both are 60 years old and both are UniSuper members, and they've both been regularly topping up their super with extra after-tax contributions. Now in this case, Sue has been slightly more proactive than Reggie, and she started investing when she was aged 25. Reggie, on the other hand, only started contributing when he was 40. Now both invest until age 60, as they both intend on retiring when they reach their preservation age, which in their situation is 60. So Sue's investment time frame is 35 years, and she's contributed $2,000 a year, which equates to less than $40 a week, so it's not really a whole lot of money. And in total, therefore, she's invested $70,000. Reggie, on the other hand, his investment time frame is 20 years, and because he's playing a bit of catch-up, he contributes $5,000 a year, so he's wanting to build up his at a faster rate. So in total, over the 20 years, he's invested $100,000. Now at age 60, you can see that the value of Sue's investment has grown to just over $372,000, compared to Reggie's, which is lesser at just over $247,000. So let's see what that looks over time, just in the next slide. So this chart shows the big impact that small contributions can have over a long period of time by harnessing the effects of compounding. And with super being a long-term investment, it's an ideal place to begin saving for your retirement. So even though Sue invested less money in total than Reggie, she's ended up with $125,000 more than Reggie has. And the reason for this comes down to the simple fact that Sue had more time. So her 15-year head start meant that her money had more time to benefit from the effects of compounding. Compound interest makes money grow at a faster rate than simple interest due to the fact that the earnings from your investment also begin to earn a return. So the graph demonstrates how contributing a smaller amount earlier on can provide a better outcome at retirement when compared with waiting and contributing a larger amount later on. It's quite common for a lot of us in the room who might have a mortgage, for example, and the focus might be to reduce your debt, and so your sole focus is to try and pay off your mortgage as fast as possible, and that's where all your cash flow is going, or you might be just spending too much and enjoying yourself to think, oh, you know, she'll be right and I'll pay into my super later on when the mortgage is gone, or let's say when the kids have grown up. But making those small changes now, as you can see up on the table there, can make a pretty significant impact down the track. So also, as we saw in the earlier slides as well, there are limits on how much that you can contribute in any one year. And therefore this restricts the amount that you can contribute in later years. So even if you got down the track and you decided, I've got a lot of cash flow surplus now, you are still restricted to the relevant caps that we discussed earlier. So it's important to note that it is never too late to start as well, but it is clear to see that in this case, the early bird really, I guess, does catch the worm. And lastly, as I mentioned previously, it is important to note that once contributions are made to super, they do become preserved. So all I would say as well is don't go and try and put all of your money into super, because you won't be able to access it for quite a while. So another contribution strategy available to those looking to boost their superannuation at a faster rate is by using one's carry forward concessional contribution cap. So starting from 1 July 2019, anyone with a total superannuation balance of less than $500,000 is eligible to make catch-up concessional or before-tax contributions to their super by carrying forward any unused concessional cap allowance for up to 5 years, if eligible. What does this actually mean? So essentially, anyone with a total super balance of less than $500,000 at the beginning of the financial year who hasn't fully used their concessional contribution cap for one or more of the past 5 financial years can add to their super balance by making additional before-tax contributions using their concessional cap allowance from previous years. Now, this particular contribution strategy is just one of a number of various strategies that one could consider when thinking about adding more to their super. There's also other contribution options available, including things like spouse contributions and contribution splitting, as well as the government co-contribution for lower to middle income earners as well. So onto a case study again. Let's go back to Sarah. So she's currently got a super balance of $200,000 and she's received $9,500 or 9.5% in employer contributions for the 2018 financial year. She's also started receiving her $10,000 in additional contributions via the salary sacrifice, which we discussed before. And let's assume that she doesn't have any pay rises and her contributions are the same in the next 2 years. However, the super guarantee, the SG contribution, is increased to 10% in the 2021-22 financial year, meaning her employer contributions would be $10,000 for that year, so that her total contributions have increased to $20,000. So using her catch-up contributions, Sarah has the ability to carry forward contributions of $5,500 from each of the 2018, 2019 and 2020 financial years, as well as $7,500 from the 2021 financial year. Now this, together with the $27,500 cap that she can make in the current 22 financial year, means she could potentially make up to $51,500 in before-tax contributions. So 2 important things to note here are that only contributions made from the 2018 financial year onwards are eligible to be carried forward. And secondly, only a total of 5 years' worth of unused concessional contributions are able to be carried forward as well. Now, another useful contribution strategy to be aware of, one which is of use sooner rather than later, and I'd hazard a guess might potentially be something of more interest to a lot of us in the room tonight, is known as the First Home Super Saver Scheme. Now, the First Home Super Saver Scheme was originally introduced back on 1 July 2017, and it allows people who've never owned a property before to make extra contributions into super using super's lower tax rates to help save for a deposit for a first home. So under the scheme, you're allowed to contribute up to $15,000 each financial year and up to a total of $50,000 per individual. So as a couple, that's $100,000 that could be saved in super to go towards a first home deposit. Now, eligible contributions can include salary sacrifice, so your before-tax contributions, as well as after-tax contributions. Once you're then ready to purchase your home, an application to release the funds must be made to the ATO. And when the application is approved, your extra contributions plus any applicable interest or earnings are then released to you for the sole purpose of being put towards a deposit for your first home purchase. So using your super account to save for a home deposit is a good alternative way to using, let's say, a bank account to save for your first home, as it's quite a tax-effective method if you're already working. It's important to note that if you change your mind regarding purchasing a home and you have already started salary sacrificing to super, your savings will remain in your super account and effectively go towards growing your retirement savings if you end up not using that money to purchase the first home. Now, there are lots of rules around this scheme, so please do visit the ATO website in the first instance for further information about it as well. Now, another important consideration when it comes to your super is how your funds are invested. When considering which investment option to choose, it's good to first define your investment objectives, and a good place to start is by working out what type of investor are you. So on this slide, we've noted 3 important objectives to consider when it comes to investing. Now, the first consideration is around capital preservation and time. So how long do we expect to invest our funds for? Or in other words, what's the investment time frame available to us? When it comes to your super, most of us here in the room will not be able to access super for at least another 30 or so years. So this, therefore, is a considerably long-term investment time horizon that would allow one to naturally take a higher level of risk, even if by nature that person is relatively conservative. Another example, back on the topic of saving for a home deposit, so quite often enough, many people consider investing their savings in order to have a larger deposit when it comes to buying a first house. Now, generally speaking, if this is the case, you'd want to consider when you actually plan on purchasing your house in determining whether it's appropriate or not to invest in, say, shares or managed funds versus keeping it in something like a high interest cash savings account or a term deposit. If you plan on purchasing a house within the next year or so, it may make more sense to opt for capital secure options because in the short term, let's say growth assets could go backwards and you could lose money on that. Whereas if you had a longer term time frame available to you, you might then start to consider potentially more growth focused investment options. However, when talking about the first home super saver, one important thing to know is that the interest on your funds contributed to super is actually based on a predetermined ATO formula, which is the 90-day bank bill plus 3%, so not the actual earnings on whatever your super fund makes during that period of time. Now, the next consideration when it comes to investing is to think about risk and return. Now, people always tend to want their investment to achieve the highest return possible without any risk to their capital, which unfortunately doesn't work like that. So when it comes to risk and return, there is a direct correlation or relationship that exists. And this means that the higher the return you're trying to achieve, generally the higher the risk will be and the higher the chance you might actually lose capital. The last consideration when talking about investments is to consider one's own values and beliefs. So taking into account various environmental, social and governance factors, or ESG for short, when making investment decisions can be a good way to ensure that your own individual preferences, values and beliefs aligns with your choice to invest, because it's not always solely focused on getting a return of your investment as well. Now, on a side note, if this is an important area for you, especially when it comes to your retirement savings, given the long-term investment time horizon, many super funds, including UniSuper, do have sustainable focused investment options, which you could consider if you're wanting to make a more positive impact for future generations. So some of the investment basics when it comes to super to be aware of. So firstly, there are different types of assets your money will be invested in. And this ranges from shares, so both Australian and international shares, fixed income securities such as bonds and cash, and unlisted assets like physical property, infrastructure, and private equity. Some assets are more volatile than others. So for example, shares in companies on the stock market will fluctuate in value on a daily basis compared with something like cash, which is capital stable in nature. Now, risk and return plays a big role in how much super you'll have when you retire or how much pension income you'll be able to draw. So understanding how risk and return works, especially when it comes to your own attitudes towards risk, can help you make investment decisions that are right for you. So by risk, what we mean here is the possibility that you may lose money on your investments. And by return or investment returns, we mean the amount that you might earn on your investment, and this amount is usually expressed as a percentage per annum. Now, it might sound a bit obvious, but there's no guarantee of positive returns when you're investing your super. So people seem to think sometimes that they're guaranteed to be positive or that their super balance will go up every year. This isn't obviously the case. So this is why big economic events such as the GFC, so the global financial crisis, the COVID pandemic, and more recently the war in Ukraine can be such a big deal, especially as people get closer to retirement. So when it comes to the investment options within your super, most funds will generally rank their options in terms of risk level. So if you've ever had a look at a fund's website or product disclosure statement, they'll give you the investment options and give you an idea of how risky it is. Now, those options that are classified as high risk generally have the potential for higher growth over the long term, but will tend to fluctuate more and be impacted more severely during market downturns. Conversely, investment options that are classified as low risk are less likely to see negative returns and major fluctuations over the short term. However, typically they have comparatively lower returns and growth when you're comparing it with the longer term higher risk options. So one important investment fundamental that I often find myself reminding clients myself is, especially during periods of market volatility like we've been having or more recent times, is that when it comes to your super, remaining invested or time in the market is generally more effective than timing the market. Now, it's important to remember that if people switch reactively based on fear and emotions, or as we call it, panic switching, they're actually responding to events that have already happened. Even if you are able to, time your shift correctly and avoid losses, so for example, from let's say a GFC type market event, by moving from growth or higher risk assets to defensive or lower risk assets like cash, there comes the issue of then having to switch back in and not lock in your losses. Now, it's quite common that people often forget this second decision and can crystallize their losses, but don't buy back in until after the market has already rebounded or bounced back up, meaning that they've actually missed out on the potential gains as well. So your super should be viewed with a long-term lens or as an investment for the next few decades rather than over the short term. So these short-term market movements, they'll likely not matter in, let's say, 30 years' time. So therefore, you also shouldn't feel the need to make changes and react based on emotions, based on those short-term events. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, the majority of us in the room tonight have that time on our sides and can afford to, what we call, stay the course when markets are volatile, meaning that over the long term, you generally will, benefit from the gains in your investment. So most people think of their super as a means of saving for their retirement. It can also be an effective tool for putting in place and funding an appropriate risk management strategy for protecting both yourself and your loved ones when things don't go to plan. So many insurance products can be paid directly from your super account. Now, the benefit of this is that it can often mean having the right protection in place whilst also not having to burden your own personal cash flow with the insurance premiums. So if you've never had a look at what cover you have within super, it's very likely that you may already have some default or automatic levels of cover in place. However, it's important that this cover be reviewed on a regular basis to ensure that it actually does meet your needs. So other areas to consider include whether you actually have the right levels of cover in place. It's often the case that a lot of people are underinsured, especially in Australia, which means that you don't have enough cover. But it can also be the case whereby you're overinsured, which means having too much cover. So for example, it's common for individuals who have worked a number of jobs, who might have a number of super funds, to therefore have several insurance policies in place due to the automatic cover provided, and therefore they might actually have too much cover. So one should also consider if they have the right types of cover in place. So generally speaking, within super, you're able to take out 3 main insurances or types of insurances. So the first one being life insurance, the second one being total and permanent disablement insurance, and the third one is income protection. So insurance to protect your income if you're unable to work for an extended period of time. Now, it's vital to get this aspect of your finances in place and structured to suit your needs, so it's always a good idea to seek advice on the matter when it comes to personal insurance requirements. So who gets your super if it outlives you? Now, an important aspect of superannuation to note is that your super benefits don't automatically form part of the assets under your will, so it doesn't automatically go to your estate. Now, that's because super is legally considered to be held in trust until you're eligible to access it. For this reason, choosing a beneficiary, which is the person that you'd like to receive the funds, is pretty important. Now, there are some rules that apply, and there are a few ways to nominate your super beneficiary. The first is, as it says up there, a non-binding nomination. So under this arrangement, you nominate what we call a preferred person. However, the trustee is not legally obliged, so it's not a legally binding arrangement. So the trustees of the super fund aren't legally obliged to pay it out to who you've nominated, and so they've got to follow, due process. The next nomination option is a binding nomination, and under this arrangement, so long as the nomination is a valid one, the super trustees are legally obliged to pay your funds out to your specified beneficiary. Now, this can provide peace of mind for loved ones in what can often be a pretty difficult time. So binding nominations can either be established as a lapsing or a non-lapsing nomination. A valid lapsing binding nomination remains in effect for 3 years from the date it was first signed, last confirmed or amended, but it does mean that it needs to be renewed every 3 years, otherwise it will lapse. And a valid non-lapsing binding nomination, on the other hand, it won't expire unless you amend or revoke it, so it doesn't need to be confirmed or updated every 3 years. And lastly, there is also an option to nominate a reversionary beneficiary. Now, this is only applicable to pension accounts and is generally established when one retires. So under this arrangement, a pension income stream can automatically revert to a certain beneficiary, such as a surviving spouse, for example. Now, super beneficiary nominations, it is good to know, can only be made to limited groups of people, such as a spouse or a child, or someone financially dependent on you. The advantage of nominating someone as a beneficiary on your super is that the money can be paid straight to them without having to firstly be paid to your estate and then divvied up as per the will. However, if you're unable to nominate someone or don't want to nominate a dependent, you've also got the option to nominate your legal personal representative of your estate. Now, under this arrangement, your will would then determine who your benefits are paid to, and therefore it's essential that you have an up-to-date will in place as well. So I just want to spend a bit of time to provide some information on who UniSuper is. So UniSuper began with a single compelling idea that we can deliver better value. We're now one of Australia's largest super funds with more than 500,000 members, and we've got close to $110 billion of net funds under management. So if you've ever looked at any of the various independent ratings agencies out there when you're, let's say, comparing super funds, you've probably seen, you might have actually seen UniSuper up in the top 3 because we're normally up there. Now, we've also got strong long-term investment performance, although it's important to note that this obviously doesn't guarantee future performance, and we also do offer some of the lowest fees on the market as well. So UniSuper is also committed to supporting you throughout your working life and beyond as well, so in retirement. And we've got a flexible range of super and retirement options to suit your needs when you do eventually retire down the track. And our purpose is to provide greater retirement outcomes for you, and our vision is to provide great value and excellent service. Now, in terms of sustainable investments, which we touched on earlier as well, UniSuper is a leader in responsible investing. So we actually have the largest pool of funds invested in sustainable investment options in superannuation in the country. So we've got over $14 billion in sustainable options as of May this year. So we assess environmental, social and governance, or ESG factors across every investment that we make as well. So every single dollar of your super within the fund has had this taken into consideration. So some of the things that we engage on, we provide feedback to major companies on their ESG reporting. So companies like Horizon, BlueScope, Coles, Rio Tinto, Woolworths, just to name a few. Also, our ESG team has an ongoing focus on areas like modern slavery, human rights, and how systematic disadvantage can be improved through responsible sourcing policies. And the big topic, obviously, as well, climate change obviously presents risk to our investments. So we need to understand our exposure to these risks as well as opportunities to secure our members' futures as well. So we expect that the companies that we choose to invest in to reduce their emissions, to understand climate risks in their business, and also disclose their activities and impacts. So for more information about, I guess, this topic, you can also read our climate risk and investments report, which is available online via our website as well. Now, I spoke before about responsible investing in our sustainable and environmentally branded investment options. You can actually choose to invest your accumulation super in these options. So for our two sustainable options, which we've got the sustainable balanced and sustainable high growth, we further screen out companies with material exposures to areas like alcohol, gaming, weapons, fossil fuels, and exploration and production, as well as companies in breach of the UN Global Compact. Our mainstream options don't have these specific exclusions for nuclear weapons. Now, we've also got another option called the Global Environmental Opportunities Fund, and this excludes the same as the two sustainable options that I just mentioned, but it also focuses on companies that aim to deliver solutions or products in clean energy, energy efficiency, waste and pollution control, clean water and green buildings. There are also three other options that don't have any exposure to fossil fuels, being the cash option, the Australian bonds option, and the diversified credit income fund. So if you are looking to, I guess, tailor a responsible or sustainable portfolio, you could consider a fund like UniSuper. So why choose UniSuper? We're proud to be consistently recognised as an award-winning fund. We have been named Money Magazine's Best Super Fund of the Year for 2022, as well as the Super Ratings Fund of the Year for 2022. Now, for decades, our award-winning products and services have been trusted by the higher education and research sector as well. And our doors are also open. So as of July last year, our doors opened, which means we became a public fund, so that more Australians, you don't have to be employed by a university or in the sector, can actually join and enjoy the benefits of low fees, strong performance, and commitment to sustainable investments. So these combined make UniSuper one of the most well-regarded industry super funds in Australia. So how we can help as well. So at UniSuper, we do have 3 services to help you find a solution if you're needing assistance. So the first port of call would be via one of our super consultants who can help with general advice inquiries. And if you are a UniSuper member, there's no additional cost as it's included as part of your membership. So if you would like to book or arrange an appointment, you can arrange one with your local super consultant via our online link up there, or by calling our helpline as well. And we also offer two types of personal advice, so select advice and comprehensive advice, which both operate on a professional fee-for-service basis. So please feel free to call us, and we can always help you decide which advice is right for you if you are looking for assistance. So we've got some time for questions now. If anyone does have any, don't be shy. Feel free to ask any questions if anyone does.
I have a question related to changing super funds.
Yep.
So I was just curious that if you do change super funds, is there a capital gains tax event when you do change, and what other fees and charges might be involved in changing?
Yeah, so in terms of capital gains tax, good question. It depends on the type of super fund that you're in. If you're in let's say a fund like UniSuper, which is known as a master trust, where it's a kind of a grouped or pooled fund, capital gains tax is kind of absorbed by everyone and it's built into the unit price. If you're in more of an individual wrap style super fund, there would be, I guess, capital gains because it applies to your own individual investments. And then, so you mentioned, sorry, what was the question about fees?
Other fees that might be related to changing between funds?
Generally speaking, nowadays, not really. There might be kind of nominal switching or kind of sell down fees, but generally speaking, in the industry in this day and age, it is kind of frowned upon to have large exit fees or penalties like that. Yep. Any other questions?
I mean, if you pass to concessionary contributions, what's the advantage of putting more money in, really? Because you'll be paying your own tax rate anyway, and then you're taking that money and locking it away for such a long time, especially if you're young. In a general sense, there's really not much reason why you do that.
So the main advantage is due to so it's also, there's a tax saving by putting money into super, but there's also a tax saving on the earnings that your money makes whilst in super. So the balance in super, any earnings that those funds are making is only ever taxed at up to 15%. So compared that with your marginal tax rate, where you can be taxed up to 47% if you had that same investment in your personal name, you're only ever going to be paying tax at up to 15%. And then later on down the track, when you're retired and you've satisfied a condition of release, you can effectively shift that money up to a certain limit into a tax-free earnings environment. Any other questions?
I've got a question on the first home super saver scheme. So, do you have to make additional contributions into your super fund, or can you just rely on the compulsory employer?
It has to be additional contributions, so it can't be your employer SG. You need to make personal, whether it be before or after tax contributions. It does need to be personal savings. Yeah.
So in general, it sounds like if you've got like a high income, the after tax or the non-concessional way is probably better. But in general, if your income is high, what would be the better contribution method?
So it's actually probably the other way around. So the higher your marginal tax rate is, the more effective pre-tax contributions are, because obviously if you're on a higher marginal tax rate, there's a greater difference between that and the 15% rate of tax. If you're on a lower rate of tax, and it depends on what your taxable income is, but after-tax contributions might be more appropriate, because let's say if you're earning less than the tax-free threshold, it doesn't make sense to make a before-tax contribution and have it taxed at 15%, rather than putting it into super as an after-tax contribution. Yep. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Why is there a cap on contributions?
Good question. I guess it's the government's way of preventing people from, I guess, putting an unlimited amount of money in quite a concessionally taxed environment. In the past, the contribution cap used to be quite a lot higher. So for concessional contributions at one point in time, it used to be $100,000 a year. And it's just to try and, I guess, stop people from squirreling all their money in essentially a tax-free earnings environment or concessionally taxed environment. Yep.
Just a question about the first home super saver.
Yep.
So you say you've already maxed up 25,500. Can you put in? Is it taxed
at, say you want to put another 15,000 on top of that, what is that 15,000 taxed at? Is it taxed at 32.5 or?
Okay, so you're saying if you, let's say if you have used your before tax contribution cap. Okay, so firstly, you can only do a maximum of $15,000 a year. So, I mean, that would fit within depending on what you're earning in terms of what your employer contribution is, a lot of the time that would fit within that concessional or before tax cap. If, let's say, you do manage to maximise your before tax cap and you've still got that some of that 15,000 remaining, you could just simply make it as an after-tax contribution, so you don't get taxed on its way into super. Yeah. Go ahead.
Is salary packaging same like salary sacrifice?
It's similar in the sense that it's money that you're packaging or putting away before paying any personal income tax on it, but obviously it's different in the sense that it's not going into super, it's going into other areas like your mortgage or entertainment cards, meal cards, that kind of thing.
So we can have salary packaging and salary sacrifice?
Correct, yes. Yep.
So just off the top of your head, what's your taxable income that needs to be from your employer before your employer contribution exceeds the maximum concessional contributions that you can have per year?
Okay, so it used to be, because it's basically 27,500 divided by 10.5%. I mean, before last month it was 275,000 because the SG was 10%, but now it's 10.5%. Yep.
You mentioned the government co-contribution scheme. What is the low or middle income threshold for that? It's not on that.
Good question. I don't know if that off the top of my head because there is basically the rates always change, and so there is a basically if you look on the ATO website there will be the thresholds or the rates for that. I mean that government co-contribution scheme is a good scheme, but they have, I guess over the years they have watered it down a bit. It used to be that they would match if you put $1,000 into super, they would match it by $1.50, so they'd contribute up to $1,500. And that was the initial scheme when it first rolled out, but over the years it's kind of been watered down. So if for every dollar that you're putting, they'll put basically 50 cents, so they'll put up to $500 for you as well, which still is money for Jam, but yeah. Go ahead.
The contribution of 27,500 a year that we have, is that inclusive of what my employer
Correct.
puts in as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And if I put my salary sacrifice money, if I were to get it out, instead of using it for first home buying, if I use it for a business, is it possible?
No, so as I mentioned in the presentation, when you're salary sacrificing, pretty much the only other way you can kind of get it out is that first home super saver, but apart from that, it essentially becomes preserved and locked away until you can meet a condition of release to be able to access your super, which generally speaking is closer to your retirement. Yep. Any other questions at all?
So sorry, saying what you were actually you're saying just make it 10% because it's easy enough to work out. If you got an income of 275,000 a year, it's past the division 293 threshold then, isn't it? So then just double checking all the income that goes into your super is then taxed at 30% instead of 15%.
So the amount above 250, so yeah, to $25,000 of those contributions.
So what's above 25?
Yeah.
250, that's the tax, so 30%. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still a tax advantage at that point?
Yeah, correct, because 47% versus 30%. Yep. Go ahead.
So what if somebody decides to voluntarily retire maybe at age like 40, let's say? So can you access your super then?
No, you can't. So preservation age for most of us in the room is going to be age 60. So if you wanted to, let's say, early retire, you'd need to have some form of other savings to be able to self-fund your retirement until you can access super. So you might build up, let's say, investments in your personal name, for example. Yep.
If you have more than one super, is it worth actually to put it all together, or is it okay to have more than one super?
Yeah, I mean, that question is kind of, it's bordering on advice and it is a bit hard to say because it does depend on your circumstances. Generally speaking, it normally is a good idea to consolidate because of things like you're paying kind of a set of fees on each super fund and just for ease of management as well. But there are other things to consider, like if you have insurances within those super funds, and you might not be able to obtain new insurances for any other reasons, like health, for example. You might want to hang on to certain super funds because of the insurances that you have in them. Yep. Did you have?
On the carry forward concession contribution, where if you haven't been contributing up to the cap
Yep.
for the past 5 years, do you just make a voluntary after-tax contribution? Is that how it works?
So you can either salary sacrifice more, or you can do what's called a personal deductible contribution. So essentially that's making an after-tax contribution and then notifying the super fund that you're going to claim a tax deduction on that contribution, so that the super fund will then class it as a pre-tax contribution. Yep.
With the new changes, like the increase the guaranteed superannuation rate, is it projecting to increase until like either 11?
It's gone up to 12%, yep.
Yeah. Are there any implications for us apart from us getting more money?
Not that I can think of, yeah. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's kind of just the government's way of encouraging or making sure that essentially that there's less reliance on the government age pension because there's a higher rate of contribution going into people's super. Yeah.
I think just to add up to that, like, obviously I'd say the downside to that I think would be that if your salary didn't change, then more money would be going into your super and you'd have less money to add.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it does depend on kind of how your employer and what it's written into your contract like, because sometimes some employers quote it as a total fixed remuneration, which includes, so yeah, it depends on kind of how you're getting paid, basically. Yeah. Cool. So that's all the questions. So finally, as always, it's important to note that this evening's presentation is general information only and can't be considered personal financial advice. And there's also a quick feedback form following the session as well. So if you wouldn't mind providing some feedback, it always helps us ensure that we're delivering relevant and meaningful content going forward. So that concludes our session tonight. Hope you found the information helpful, and just like to thank you for taking the time out of your evening, particularly on a night like this, just to attend this seminar.